Hey, I'm Weekend Gabe, and you're checking out Weekend at Gabe's, and thanks for checking out this latest episode. While you're here, also follow us on these social medias at Weekend Gabe, at Weekend at Gabe's, and also at The Real Sam Crane. Thanks for checking us out.
All right, too big. All right, let's reset for a second. You're checking out Weekend at Gabe's with Weekend Gabe and The Real Sam Crane. Give us a follow on these social medias at Weekend Gabe and also at Weekend at Gabe's and The Real Sam Crane. He is somebody too, so support him and give him a follow. Our guest tonight is a friend of the show, Mr. Jerry L. Barrow from the Fathers Who Bother podcast. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. You sound fantastic.
Okay. Just making sure. Cool.
All right, so before we get into all the great things that you've done and are doing, you've been a dad for a while now, probably longer than me. And without sounding mean, because we don't want to be mean on this show, but what are some things that you've gotten for Father's Day and you're like, you could have probably just gave me the cash?
Well, I've definitely gotten the ties and the socks. And the mugs, I've gotten so many mugs when my kids were younger. I got pens. It wasn't a bad gift. It was just like, it was a jar full of things to do with dad throughout the year. Like these little labels that said, okay, today we're going to do this with dad. And we didn't do any of it. So, I think it's still sitting on my dresser somewhere. I guess they were waiting for me to initiate. I don't know, but yeah, I've gotten all the standard mugs and pens and random stuff. Yeah.
I gotta be honest, I feel a little guilty. I didn't know mugs were causing dad so much pain, and I apologize. My dad, if you're watching, sorry, buddy. Yeah, I apologize.
After 5 years old, you got to think of something else because we get mugs from 3, 4, 5. You know, I still like the macaroni.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'll take the macaroni necklace, but the mugs.
I was just about to say, Gabe was saying he was missing sort of the school crafts, but those are still good. Those are
awesome. Those because they're handmade gifts, so they have a certain sentimentality to them. But the mug that you got at the sale, you know how they had the school sale where they said, "Okay, kids, ask your parents for $5 to come and buy him a gift for himself," and the choices are a mug, a pen, a notebook, and something, and said, "Here, Dad, here's the gift that I bought you with your own money." And it's like, well, if you're gonna do that, just like you said, give me the cash.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I'll find a better use of this.
Yeah,
I remember as a kid, like we did a plate. My mom still has this. It was like a plate, and we painted on it like "Best Mom Ever" or "Happy Mother's Day." And it was something that was tangible that you could give someone and receive it. Now it's like kind of like what you're suggesting, Jerry. It's like, oh, here off this table of stuff, choose the one that your parent probably least hates the least. So I just don't. The mugs thing is out of control because I don't have enough space for them, and also I don't drink coffee and I don't drink tea like that. So they're just there storing up, and then you also can't get rid of them because your kids gave it to you, so now you're stuck with it.
Daddy, here's the mug I bought you. Remember when ashtrays were a thing? The craft ashtrays. They took the clay and they make the ashtray. That shows you how much we've changed as a society. Once upon a time, an ashtray was a viable gift from a child to an adult. That was America at one point.
Happy cancer. Here you go.
Those little divots right there, that's my fingers to put those cancer sticks right in there. Those are my fingers. So every time you put one down, you can remember me.
Every time I ash this, I'm going to think of my child. That's terrible. Oh my God.
We come a long way, but we still got a long way to go, though. Dads deserve better.
Yes.
But let's get to the Fathers Who Bother podcast. I think you started like late last year. You're about 9 out of 10 episodes in, but they're fantastic. You've had a number of great conversations. I really enjoy you talking to like the real OGs of like hip hop when you're talking like Master Ace and his like what work. I think that's right. You did talk to Master Ace, right? I can't see your
Master Ace, Drez.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and Rhyme Fast. Oh, you're about more than 10 episodes. Yeah, and it,
40 episodes plus. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm tripping. But the great thing about the show is like you share your experience, and I think it was the episode. It was one of the earlier episodes. Remind me, it was like your son had swallowed a battery or something.
Yes. That was a segment. I was playing with the idea of a segment called "The Moment I Feared," where I would get the guests to talk about a time that they were scared as a parent. So I would lead with my own story. And the story that I led with was when my son was about 2 or 3 years old. He swallowed a watch battery from one of his video games, and he just came downstairs and was like, "Mom, Dad, I think I swallowed a battery." And of course, you think battery, you're thinking of the 9-volt car battery corroding the insides of your child, and you're panicking. So we ran to the hospital. We told them my son swallowed a battery, and they said, they did whatever. I don't know if it was a CAT scan or something, just to, look at the peek at his insides. And like, okay, we see it there. They just said monitor it, make sure that it comes out. So we literally had to go fish through his poop to make sure that he passed it, because if he didn't pass it, it meant that it was still inside of him. So, and my mother-in-law was the winner of the prize. She got the Wonka battery because he was with her when he passed it, and because every time he had a bowel movement, we had to go through it to make sure to see if the battery was in it. And my mother-in-law won the Wonka prize on that.
That is not fun. let me tell you how, because I understand your pain. And without embarrassing my children, he like drops the most massive, like it's just like I can't explain it, but it's so big that it doesn't flush. So this one episode, I might have been 2 episodes, I can't remember. I had to like treat it like dog poop and like double bag and reach in there and like wrap it up to and then race it out to the garbage can outside, because no way in hell this was staying in the house because it wouldn't flush. There's like a number of crazy things that as a parent you just don't ever imagine yourself doing, and you're just like, this is just part of the job.
Oh yeah, was he eating PF Chang's by any chance? Did you see the episode of South Park when he had the record-setting turd? And they were like, "What have you been eating?" And he's like, "PF Chang's, good stuff."
Sadly, no, but that'd been funny though.
Yeah.
What is the? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm good.
So what is the what was the sort of the initiative of bringing this show to life? Because I think it's a phenomenal, great idea. Because we often, especially in hip hop, we look at especially male artists as like alphas. They're especially if they have a projection about them, like this bravado. They're either street, they're dangerous, and and unfairly, that's kind of how they're framed to sell or to make them look appealing. And this kind of pulls back the curtain on that idea that some of the people that you've seen do awful things in movies and music, they're actually decent human beings who are just trying to raise children the correct way. Well, what was sort of the inspiring idea that made you want to do this?
It was that dichotomy. When I was doing interviews, like you mentioned, I've been interviewing rappers since 1997, pretty much, and there were moments when they would show up at the office or whatever with their children. And the focus of the interview, of course, was their project, their music, anything but their children. But it was so cool to me to see them interacting with their child outside of the interview. I think even in one case, I interviewed Saigon. He brought his daughter with him, and she wouldn't let him put her down. So he's like, is it okay if I do this interview with her on my lap? I said, sure. I felt like that was a great thing for people to be able to see. So that was kind of what planted the seed, and it was happening more and more. When I was running WatchLoud.com, Rock Ness Monster came by. He had his daughter. Royce the 5'9" came by. He had his daughter. And you just saw that these artists were trying to juggle fatherhood and their careers and doing press. And it's like, well, if I have to go around the city, I'm going to at least have my kid with me for the day. And I just said, you know what? I want to talk to them about being a dad. So fast forward, the name of the pod was originally going to be Diary of a Mad Black Daddy from the Little Brother skit from the minstrel show. And I had reached out to Fonte at the time saying, hey, I have this idea for a podcast. Would you be down? And are you cool with me using this name? He was like, sure, no problem. But I didn't get around to it till years later when, the pandemic hit. I got let go from BET. And I said, okay, if there's ever a time for me to do this, now's the time. So I had a couple of friends that showed me how to record remotely. A good friend of mine, Rebecca Theodore Rashawn, she runs a podcast. She showed me how to use this thing called Zencaster. And then Rakia Mays does Real Black News. She showed me how to do, what microphones and stuff I would need. So I was like, okay, this is doable. So then it was just going through my Rolodex and remembering artists who I knew and had contacts with who were fathers. And that's really how season 1 started. It was it was a murderer's row of great MCs that I'd interviewed that happened to be dads, from Fonte to Sky Zoo, Mickey Fax, Torre, you name it, and it's been great.
Yeah. The Father's Day, the Fonte episode was absolutely hilarious. Sam, if you didn't get to that one yet, his son begins to start to loan his shoes out to be worn by other kids. So kids pay him to wear his shoes.
Yeah.
And it just turns into this whole thing that's absolutely hilarious. But it's a great lesson at the end of it. So there's all these little nuggets of information that are kind of preparing me for a teenager, because the fuckery just has no limitations on what kids will try to do to hustle for a few bucks. And
Yeah, that was great. Fonte is just a great conversationalist. I had a relationship with him since the source when Little Brother got the 4 mics for the listening and the minstrel show reviews. So we stayed in touch over the years. So I knew that and I listened to his podcast QLS, Questlove Supreme. Right. So I knew he'd be a fantastic guest. So that was easy.
I love listening to the podcast because I am not a father. I'm not close to being a father, but it just feels so warm. When you're telling these stories with people. And one of the questions that you ask, I think almost every episode, is when did you find out you were going to be a dad? I wonder if you could tell us that story for yourself.
Oh my goodness. If I can remember, we were living in Brooklyn in our apartment, and it was kind of a surprise because we had been trying. We had been married for less than a year. We had been trying, but then we had stopped. And then, it wasn't really as dramatic as some of the other stories. My wife just came to me one day. She's like, I'm late. She's like, I'm never late. And I'm like, really? And then she took the test and she was like, yeah, we're having a baby. He was like, oh shit. Oh, but this is the funny part. So I go to tell my friends, my closest friends. First, I called my best friend and I say, hey, I got to tell you guys something. Normally, you're not supposed to tell people that you're pregnant right away. The wisdom is you're supposed to wait until after the first trimester. But I was just too excited, and I just said, yeah, I'm going to tell my boy. I said, hey, Fred, guess what? We're going to have a baby. He's like, word? Guess what? Me and Betty are pregnant. I was like, what? You crazy? So I was like, for real? He's like, yeah, for real. And so then we had one of our old roommates, and we said, yo, we got to call Jay. So we called Jay. Said, yo, Jay, Fred and I got to tell you something. He said, what? Yo, me and Fred, Mel and Betty are pregnant. He's like, well, guess what? My wife's pregnant. So all 3 of our wives were pregnant, and our boys were born a week apart. My son, Fred's son came first. I remember because it was Friday the 13th, and the running joke is he's Jason and his father's Freddy. And then my son came after, and then our friend James's son came after. So the boys came 3 weeks apart. So that's the crazy thing about how I found out I was going to be a dad. I called my friends, and it seemed like I impregnated them by sharing the news. After the third one, we said we're not calling anybody else because the next person you call is
you're gonna spread the whole thing around.
Yeah. So now all three of those boys are like just finished their freshman years in college. So
wow.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, and the most important question that I think is on everybody who's not a dad's mind is, I mean, do you ever feel like you're ready? I mean, there's certain things that I feel like you can do to maybe think that you're ready. You could get a plant, you could get a dog, or a cat, all of these things that are sort of like trial runs. Like, could I do this?
No,
there's nothing.
Nothing.
There's nothing that prepares you for fishing that turd out of the bathroom.
No. Well, maybe having a dog would, but as far as dealing with poop, but no, nothing prepared me. Luckily, I had a great example. My dad was my hero, and so I had an idea of what a dad was supposed to do or supposed to be, but nothing really prepares you. And every kid is so different. So you're just kind of just letting that kid teach you of what it needs to do, teaching you what it needs, pretty much. That's the lesson for most dads. It's like your kid is going to tell you what they need. Just be attentive.
I'll answer your question of how I found out with the oldest, which is a fascinating trend for the second child, right? The day that my wife found out, she was in the doctor for something non-related. She took a urine sample and they ran it a pregnancy test, and it was something she wasn't aware of. And as she was leaving the hospital, they were like, "Hey, congratulations!" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And so that's how she found out, because she hadn't been feeling great. And then she told me in the car. And the same day she was fired from her job. So she's like, "Hey, I got some good news and I have some bad news." And I was like, "Well, let's go with the good news first." And she's like, and then she slid me the ultrasound. And I was like, "What's the bad news?" And she's like, "Well, I lost my job today." So fast forward to 2019, when we're having our second child, my wife loses her job, gets fired again while pregnant. I was like, this is becoming a trend. But she bounced back with a better job. She has a way better job now, so it all worked out. But yeah, it's always been a roller coaster for us. I love the premise of the show. I think it's fantastic, and I think that people really need to dive deep into these conversations because I think they're important to have because it definitely spreads more light on some of these artists who may not be comfortable. And it kind of reminds me of, I think it was I can't remember the story, but it was something to the effect of I think it was maybe DMX was recording in the same studio Biggie was, something like that, and they saw Biggie laughing. And it was once he sort of saw an outsider seem kind of revealing himself, he shut it down. And it's with hip hop artists, especially, is they have to keep this front on all the time. And kind of what you were saying, as far as is it okay if I have my daughter? I was like, what normal person would say, no, that's not okay?
Right.
But it's almost they have to ask permission to be normal, and I think that this is opening that door to listen, it's okay if I have children outside of what you know about me on the music front, and I think you're doing a great job with doing that.
Thank you. It's been a great ride, and I love that I've been able to incorporate actors and singers and DJs and producers. The breadth of experience has been something else. Talking to some of the older dads. Mr. Walt from Beat Miners, his son is grown. I have tomorrow's episode is Sean C from Grind Music. His son, he was 19 in 1990, so his son's about to get married. So his perspective is very different from Matt Wiles, who just had his daughter's a year old, and you're talking to some of the fathers trying to deal with their kids in a pandemic, and it's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask one quick question before we ask what Gabe's going to ask. But you talk about in the description of the podcast, dad as they want to be. What does that mean to you?
Well, it was the play on the pun. I believe Dad as we want to be. Dad as we want to be for me is literally dad's being being the father that we wanted to be, and in some cases the father that we didn't have. So we talked, like you mentioned, Master Ace earlier. Even though he knew his father, he didn't really know his father. His father wasn't in his life for very long. So now, he has a daughter. He's getting to be the dad that he wants to be. The dad that being a father the way he wanted to be. And in some cases, if the father was there, you decide, you know what, I want to do things my way. Even though I love my father, he passed in 2018. He was a great dad, but I didn't want to be a dad just like him, because times have changed. My father's a old West Indian immigrant and just had different ideals, and trying to raise a kid in Generation E on the internet, with the internet and all this other stuff, it's a whole other skill set that he has no idea how to deal with a kid on Twitter or a kid on Snapchat. So that's why that's where the dad as we want to be came from.
Yeah. Have you yourself, listening to these stories, has it given you some perspective of how you approach your own children? Listening to, like you said, there's such a wide range of the guests who are in different stages of fatherhood. But has it given you any perspective or reflection about your own approach?
I'm my kids are older, so I'm pretty much set with them for the most part. But what it does, by the time they're 18, they're you've done all you can do. But what it has done for me is it's made me feel good or reinforced what I've thought or what I've done with my kids, to hear how other fathers have handled certain situations, talking about trying to give kids driving lessons or, things like that. More than anything, it's just been comforting to know that I wasn't alone in thinking certain things. And I've been fortunate enough to have like a circle of friends that are also fathers. Like Dave Thomas from Vibe Magazine is one of my closest friends. We talk about our kids all the time, but talking to, a Drez or Royce about their experience has definitely reinforced, like, okay, so I'm not crazy when the kids did that thing. I'm like, okay, so it wasn't just me, so there's a lot of that, and it definitely seeing what the guys that have multiple kids, like 5 and 6, I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I stopped at 2. Like I'm done. That was a smart decision, because I'm not built for the 3 and 5 kids. Like Shaw Money Excel, he's trying to have as many kids. He's trying to start a football team, right? That dude has like 8 or 9. I lost count by the end of that episode, and they're all named after S. Like, how do you have that many children? And they're all S names. I would have run out of J names after 3 or 4. So, but yeah, that's probably. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the closest.
It's like a George Foreman who named like all his sons George III.
Yeah,
George.
pretty much.
Like,
if he could have named all his kids Shah, he would have.
Before we let you go, I mentioned this to you. I wanted you to expound on this because it's one of the most angriest moments I've ever had. You wrote the cover story for Scratch, DJ Premier and Nas, 2005. The album that everyone is still hoping that we'll get one day in the future. What about that story, and why did we never get the album? And what about that story?
That was me trying to create something. Typically in media, you are there to help promote what's already there, right? So here I am. I've got this magazine. They're pushing me to create to increase newsstand sales. It's a producer-driven magazine. They're like, okay, you need to start putting rappers on the cover. And I was trying to push back against that. Like, I don't want to put rappers on the cover. Rappers already have umpteen magazines. But they kind of hedged their bets with the first 7 or 8 covers, because the producers they put on were also rappers. Kanye, Pharrell, Dre, Eminem. They were also rappers. So I came in and I put Just Blaze on the cover as the first purely producer, non-rapping producer on the cover. And they were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "This is what it's supposed to be. This is hip hop, damn it." And I fought that fight for I think 2 issues. I think the next one was Jermaine Dupri and Swizz Beatz, and we did a split. And then finally, they were like, "Okay, listen, if you want to keep this magazine alive, we need to start putting some rappers on the cover." And I said, "Well, if I'm gonna put a rapper on the cover, I'm gonna try and put the greatest rapper I can." But I wanted to start from the producer. I said, "Well, who's a producer that I've been wanting to get on the cover?" I wanted to get DJ Premier cover. And I said, how could I get DJ Premier cover with this new mandate? Which artist could I pair him with? And I thought Nas. And I went to Premier's people first, and I said, would you guys be willing to do a cover with Nas? And they were like, sure. So then I reached out to Nas's people, and they loved the idea because Nas, I guess, was just excited to be, paired up with Primo again and kind of going back to that chamber. We shot at it, the old D&D headquarters, and they actually were going to record songs. So it was me trying to use the magic 8-ball to create and predict something versus something that was already confirmed. I said, okay, if we do this cover, we're gonna push them to actually do this album. And to my understanding, songs were actually recorded, but songs we'll never hear. That's what I've been hearing. So I'm sorry. I tried to do it for hip hop, y'all. I tried. And so I can say is I tried.
It's cool. I love Scratch, by the way. I thought it was a phenomenal magazine, and I wish it would have had a little bit more legs, a little bit more time to grow. But I understand that, like these things are like, if they don't take off right away, then
Right.
the chances of it staying long. But anyways, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us here on Weekend at Gabe's.
Thank you for having me.
The Fathers Who Bother podcast. Go subscribe to it. Put it into your feed. It's one of the best things you can listen to, especially during this time when people are just looking for some really good ideas of how to get through this parenting journey, which I always am, looking for good advice. Thank you, man. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We appreciate you. Hope you can stop by soon and again in the future.
Sure thing. Thanks again.
All right, Jerry Barrow here on Weekend at Gabe's Fathers Who Bother podcast. Go put it into your life. It's the best thing to do.
Hey, I'm Weekend Gabe. Thanks for checking out this latest episode of Weekend at Gabe's. Click on any of the links swirling around my head, and also hit the subscribe button while you're here. Thanks for checking out us here on YouTube.